What's going on, guys? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. After grinding Hazard as well as quick play in general, I wanted to discuss the upcoming meta shifts introduced by the new and very unique tank gameplay. I don't know about you guys, but the tank category has felt a little underserviced. Overwatch 2 came out in 2022, releasing with Junker Queen and then Ramatra in November. Then the next 5 heroes, only one of them was a tank with Mauga. So only one tank in 2023, and we're about to end 2024. That's kind of crazy when you think about it, since 3 of those 5 were supports. And now Hazard, although mechanically looks like Doomfist and playstyle-wise well in the solo tank world, is going to emulate other characters, because while his skill set looks overkitted, the whole game is overkitted, so he just plays the Overwatch 2 game, in my opinion. I've seen a lot of comments that Hazard's overtuned, but I think all it takes is one competent Brig player, and then all of a sudden those brittle backliner characters that have hard counter abilities to full in engage playstyles are going to be protected, the Annas and Cassidys of the world, and then this idea that Hazard is this super aggressive character just doesn't really pan out, in my opinion. Like, a Brig with health and abilities should never die to Hazard. Never? Well, part of the reason is because I think we all agree that his block does an insane amount of damage, but I think the thing that people forget about is, like, that's also his survival tool. So that means you have to have a really pristine engagement to both use it to tank like you'll need to and to deal damage with it against the right targets. And then, well, it just doesn't really do much against the Brig shield, who with armor already diminishes his damage by a lot. He's got shotgun damage. So as long as you manage your abilities as Brig, Hazard looks kind of like a joke. Yeah, he can trap you against the wall, but you shouldn't let that happen to you as Brig, in my opinion. So automatically, he comes into the game where a top meta character already is pretty strong against him, and I don't think they're gonna buff him for sure, because if anything, they'll nerf him. But even when I look to the rest of the cast, so many of the supports either fly in the air or get away. A lot of popular DPS characters I see are super brawly and sustainable with buttons to escape. I feel like I see a Venture in half my games. So oddly, I think most of the time it's going to pan out the way my advanced guide explains, which I think over the longer haul is going to be the de facto consensus that you have to play them to control space as opposed to engage. There's other tanks that can engage, but engaging naked with a character with predictable movement patterns is really easy to counter. It's easy to do it against Doom, but he's got the speed to outskill it a bit, and Hazard's just too slow. So I'm going to warn against this because we saw it happen when other top tier tanks became meta in top 500. Everyone thought it was meta for them always, but because he's a very technical tank, you have to set up everything he does and cycle his cooldowns. I'm going to say there is no way that that's going to be the case for the average player, as it's much easier to shoot anti-tank cooldowns into a feeding tank than it is to just swap off the difficult to play tank to another one. So a lot of supports I think are really strong against him, Ana Brig being the strongest, but many of them can escape play vertically, and he has to really outplay them to get the type of offense you suspect a tank that has his mechanics should. Like a Doom, Junker Queen, they have damage enough to take over the whole game, and an easy ultimate. Queen's ult is better, but like Doom's ult goes aggressive. Everything Hazard does is very teamwork reliant, which often you're just gonna feel like it's a more skill dependent way to play Winston. So when I think of the other playstyles that are definitely going to counter him, from the DPS category, I would definitely say Pharah. If we think as Pharah as a pretty good counter to Mei, well, Hazard is the tank version of Mei with a wall, and having the long-range projectile damage that doesn't care about his armor very much, can get above and around his block, play outside of his effective range almost all of the time, which is true for a lot of tanks, but some of them have defenses or at least a prayer of a play to make. Hazard, really, it's only his ultimate that he can snare you with. Other than that, like, you should constantly have distance control against him, and his range damage is not very good. When I think about what DPS could he prey on, a top meta DPS character right now is Widowmaker, who perhaps if she stays this dominant, they're just going to give her 175 HP again. And I will say, I think because Hazard is slower, I can't see why you would play him to dive her rather than another tank, which also might be able to deny some line of sight. Like, the wall can almost do that, but very likely not good enough, right? And the problem with some of these shieldless tanks, and another reason why, like, Widow's pretty darn good, is a lot of the range of the game got reined in, and the damage profile of armor means a lot of damage types aren't that effective, but Widow's still is from the front. And the damage roll nowadays is kind of like either you're really tanky and just go in and out with the tanky brawly fight, or you have super high burst damage and you play hide and go seek. And that's what Widow does. That's what a lot of characters want to do if you don't have the escape cooldowns, which it feels like almost all of the game does nowadays. I saw a lot of players trying to play Sombra against him like you might do against a Doomfist. The reason I don't necessarily advise that is because his armor health is so high. So while yes, you can hack his block, and maybe that's enough to CC stack against him, he also has some tools to control that matchup. It's not too hard for him to shotgun you during your hack to cancel it, and he's got armor health, which Doom doesn't, and that's probably the major contributor. I will say though, having double flanker is also a really good call against him, because just in general, a thing that I noticed about Hazard is that his frontal block is not as good as most other blocks. We've got Ram, we've got Doom, and I'm pretty sure it's the worst of all of them because it seems like it's pretty easy to get damage in on his arms or on the side of him. And I don't know if it was a bug or not, but I'm pretty sure I saw Junkrat doing full damage almost all the time to the block. Not sure if it's because it like technically was hitting the side, or they're probably gonna fix it if it was a bug, but it just seemed really easy for, especially if there was multiple characters against me, to not know which direction to point my block because it just wasn't good enough. Whereas Ram, it feels like if I've got a funnel of enemies against me and I hit that block, I'll live forever. Hazard, it's a little bit tricky to survive that way, so it's probably going to default to that you gotta confirm kills with the block by using it for offense, making him even more situational in the way, because if you play your tank to survive and actually tank the front line, well, you can stall a lot of the cart on the objective and stay alive for a long time. Whereas Hazard, if he has any bit of necessity for offense, well, then he's going to have to play closer to like how a Doom would. I think he's just a budget version of that, even in his pre-launch patch form, which we would expect to be on the, quote, safe side of strong every single time. Where I think Hazard's strength lies is in controlling space and counter-engaging, very similar to what a Winston likes to do, but just with a different tool set to do it. So I do think that means he's going to have an advantage on dive maps against brawl characters, just because he can wall climb and set the engage. That's really, really strong. But a big reality of the tank category is that these new tanks have so many mechanics that you have to specialize them in any given rank unless they're super busted and easy. You'll be the 42nd hero added to the roster. And what I like about this is very similar to Juno's design. It's a mix of safe tank principles that don't counter anything with mechanics alone. Like, what's a character that gets hard countered by Hazard being in the game? I don't know if there is one. And for me, that's a huge win, and perhaps now that we've seen several characters in a row that feel that way, it leaves him in a pretty good spot. The number one tank that I think he's going to struggle against is, oddly enough, Sigma, and part of the reason is that his shield can block the projectile of his wall, or he can connect grasp and eat it. Then on top of that, he has a stun for his block similar to the Doomfist matchup. So in many ways, Sigma feels kinda easy up against Hazard. Again, he has the skill expression with so much vertical mobility and optionality that you can kind of outplay anything, but that's certainly tough to fight into that. The next would be Roadhog. However, because Hazard has a widespread shotgun, the damage trade isn't too bad. And it's not always a free kill to hook him into your team, because if he has his block up, well, that just might mean he's AoE damaging everyone, and you can't really damage him that much from the front. Kind of depends. If you CC stack him, yes. I normally like a character like Junker Queen up against Doomfist as well, but because Hazard has armor, I feel a little mixed about that one. I'll have to see how that plays out when he comes out in December. Another one that I think will be pretty strong is D.Va, who's gonna positionally play in a similar way anyway, deny a good percentage of his damage, and because Hazard doesn't really auto win against any tank, I don't think, and they both have moderate mobility, it's gonna be on him to somehow get value out of his combos, whereas D.Va has a much easier job to contribute. Just point the defense matrix at things and you're going to absorb lots of the offense of the enemy, whereas Hazard's on the clock to kind of get something done, and D.Va can peel for all that. Other characters that I haven't mentioned yet, you might say Cassidy is one of the more diveable targets in the game, but like I said earlier, there's picks that you can play around it. Cassidy in the right comp is certainly pretty treacherous for Hazard to deal with. He's a very easy to hit target. While the block can get some work done, at the same time, Magnade, when he wants to escape, is devastating on that kind of tank playstyle. So if you make a mistake, surely that can punish it. Another character that I think felt pretty easy up against him is my boy Junkrat, because he is a bit slower and a big hitbox. That's a lot of damage to farm, and don't underrate the power of a trap on the floor to slow down that positional deployment-based ability exchange. At the moment, I'm not even sure he'll be one-tricked at top 500. While the skill expression is super high, it's not like Maga, who auto-won against a bunch of tanks. And it's not like Ram, who has some really obvious overtuned kit. Like Ram had an infinite ultimate, for example, when Junker Queen came out in the beta. Kiri wasn't out. So we actually haven't seen that many tanks added to Overwatch 2 anyway. And really, I would only say Mauga was a travesty for the release. And that's because, well, if you make a tank who tank busts and then you protect him, obviously that was going to be problematic. Luckily, they have fixed Mauga quite a lot. But if we compare to a release like Juno, who had what I thought was an inoffensive kit, she became top meta at the highest ranks due to both fitting in the meta and just, I think, outvaluing anything else over time, over the course of multiple fights of a match. But I'm not so sure that was widespread the case, obvious, easy meta hero, as again, with so many characters in the game, knowing any given playstyle matters so much more than optimizing for the top few percentage of players who are going to optimize any top pick. If Hazard does go the way of being a top meta tank, I would see it as similar, where maybe the potential when you execute his controlling playstyle means he can escape and then get a lot of chances at his cooldown cycle. For the average player, I see them just try to hard engage, expecting to kill things, and it's just everything eats that up. He's not the biggest hitbox, but he feels like a Mauga without a shout sometimes. Like, he's not hard to hit. Going in with his character deep against multiple targets is really, really bad a lot of the time. Even when you have blocks sometimes, because so many characters can get around it. And especially as I started playing later in the weekend, it was pretty obvious that players were figuring that out. But we'll see. When they release him, maybe they tune a few things here or there. Maybe there were some bugs they had to work out. I'd be really curious to know how his win rate fared over the course of the weekend, because tank mechanics are so severe, it changes how all of the players play, everyone countering you and everyone working with you. If anything, I'd say I saw his performance drop off significantly once other tanks started to get played. For the first few days there, everyone just wanted to play the new tank, right? But either because players are more competent on the other tanks or they know how to play with those other tanks, he didn't seem to me to be by far and away any better than anything else. But if you hard feed as any of the tanks, you're going to look like a bad hero choice. I think he's a bit more technical than that. And then overall, I just want to talk about some general thoughts about the tank role in 5v5, especially as I recently peaked into top 500 on tank, really grinding the past few seasons to improve at the role myself. Hazard is a breath of fresh air because I never really got on with Doomfist. And he's sort of the solo queue tank that you probably want to master if you really want to lobby stomp. But I gotta say, I really like his fundamentals, especially when the claim is that there isn't a tank exchange that matters in 5v5. And I think that has progressively become more and more obviously not true. It's more brawly and based on forcing out cooldowns either way. There is more blocking. It's less just straight up movement, like a chessboard of tank gameplay. That's definitely true. But in the Giga Tank matchups, there definitely is small advantages to be gained over time. And going back to play Classic for sure reminded me just how AFK and useless main tank used to be back in 6v6 Overwatch 1. While, yes, we may criticize how passive and defensive and opportunistic you have to play as one of these shooter tanks in 5v5, it's not like anyone was clamoring to hold a shield. Main tank in Overwatch 1 was widely criticized the whole time, and that really became more obvious to me after they took No Limits out. In my Overwatch Classic review, it was all for No Limits, which actually I think made picking anything easier because you could always get off a roll if you wanted, and the team comps surprisingly were less punishing in a way because the choices were less severe in terms of what your team picked, because you could double up on a roll or on a hero if you really wanted. So you could undo some mistakes from your team, but you can't also swap to Tracer if your Tracer is really bad, right? Or even a character like Roadhog, who is pretty bad for the majority of 6v6. He wasn't so bad in No Limits because Double Hog is seems like a viable comp against certain things. Mainly because Diva wasn't very good, maybe, but once they added single hero limit, the team comp decisions got very punishing all of a sudden. That's pretty crazy how that worked out because nobody, including myself, would have wanted No Limits to be the main format. It was a joke because the top meta comp was 2 Winstons, 2 Lucios, 2 Tracers. And that just seems like a silly game to be playing. But I think a thing we just always forget is the playability of this game with random teammates. And the more you need your team to be on certain things for you to even function, the less fun the game is. And I say all that in order to say, in 5v5, I think the tank experience would have been improved in some of these whining years that have stacked up if they just added more heroes. The weighting of how many options that the other roles have and how balanced all of that is, like let's say the whole game's balanced, as in everything is viable. Everything's pretty good. So because of that, you're going to feel even more pressure if you just have less options in your hero pool on any given role. Because like for me, I don't want to have to carry the game on Doomfist because I don't really want to master him. I don't like the playstyle that much. It doesn't resonate with me. Luckily, I have a bunch of other tanks that I could get up to decently higher ranks with, but immediately they add Hazard and I'm like, oh boy, that's in my playstyle, and it might mean I don't ever have to learn Doom, which I'm like overjoyed for. And this is sort of how like DPS players feel, right? Where Widow is a top pick, and if you don't play Widow, you feel kind of screwed. Well, it's sort of similar in the tank category with the mechanics, where if you just have more options in tank, even when they are countering you or you need a certain job to be fulfilled, at least it's in the roster. And I felt better about that over time as like, well, maybe Mauga's designed to fight against the long range flyer characters or something, sort of, kind of, not really, but that's how they advertised it, right? You got some brawl options, you got some control options, you got defensive play, you got aggressive play, and Hazard without a doubt is overkitted, but the whole game is about being overkitted. And that just seems blatantly obvious when you go back to play Classic. And to play a Reinhardt is to literally AFK on a corner. And the only time you get to do anything is when your teammates hand you their abilities or just farm your face to get their ult or something. Like that's what main tank used to be, guys, back in the day. And going to 5v5, they removed main tank, and Hazard is like, I think the best addition. He takes skill to execute. His character's really cool. He doesn't counter anything. Not really. Like, at least not by existing, right? Not just by rock, paper, scissors. So because of that, you probably won't need to have to play him to function as a competitive player, but to some degree, I wonder how much the game needs the characters to be broken and make no sense for the community to actually like be interested. I'm not sure. I think the health of the game is actually pretty good right now. Seems like people are playing, see a lot of content getting views, maybe not ours, but there's a lot of views on content. The game is consistently performing, I think. I'm hoping these fun and interesting options that who knows what they do to the top player base, but don't ruin the game for the average player. It's just more and more players are going to come to our game and just see a wealth of characters that they can learn and play. I don't know. I'm pretty optimistic about the game right now, but I've always been having fun with this version of the game, but I'm having more fun as they add more stuff, and I do, in fact, appreciate it more going back to miserably try 6v6 Overwatch Classic, which has its fun, but it ain't in playing main tank, I'll tell you that. Guys, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave it a like, and don't forget to click subscribe and the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.